All right, welcome back to another Beyond Clean Expert series. This is the Chemical Monitoring Expert series with our chemical monitoring expert, Alex Hilliker. I'm your host, Bobby Parker, and on today's episode, we are going to be taking a look to the future. Up until this point, we've talked a lot about how far this technology has come and how much has begun to be implemented in departments. Even last month, as we talked about some stories about how it's being implemented today. Alex, as we're nearing the end of this series, as we have it mapped out, I'd like to spend a little bit of time looking forward and seeing what is it that's coming in the future for this technology and for the industry around chemical monitoring.
Yeah, no other place to look, Bobby. Gotta look to the future. Gotta look forward.
That's right.
You know, in thinking about this and preparing for this conversation with you, I'd like to make a couple of observations just to start the discussion. I think one of the things that we're seeing already take place is that we're getting a better understanding of the acute and chronic exposure concerns of chemicals like hydrogen peroxide and parasitic acid, and even ethylene oxide for that matter. There's studies within the last couple of years, very recent, that are talking about how low the levels really need to be in terms of safe exposure for our colleagues and team members. You know, I've said for years now that this is a topic that doesn't get talked about enough, and I'm going to have to get a new line because I think now it's starting to get talked about a lot more, which is good. I'm working myself out of a narrative a little bit, which is good. I got to go to the next one. But there's more studies that are coming out about this. There's more monitoring that is being put into place, which of course is fueling that cycle of a better understanding of what's happening in the department. You know, I've said in a previous event that we did together, Bobby, that I think that in the next 3 to 5 years, continuous monitoring in sterile processing departments is going to be a given. I think it's just going to be like putting a seatbelt on in a car or putting a carbon monoxide detector in your home. You're just going to say, yeah, of course we have that. Why wouldn't we? Right? That's the direction that this is moving. And I think we see the ramifications of that in global standards that are evolving. But that's happening very slowly, of course. You know, we talked in a previous episode about global hydrogen peroxide standards for short-term exposure limits that are being implemented in countries because the long-term occupational exposure limits don't fully account for those acute exposure events. One thing that I thought was really interesting is that recently OSHA actually updated its website where it lists its permissible exposure limits for chemicals like ethylene oxide, hydrogen peroxide, and parasitic acid, the ones we've been discussing in this series. And they put a disclaimer on that website, Bobby, saying that many of those permissible exposure limits are outdated and potentially inadequate for protecting worker health because, as we've noted, these permissible exposure limits were adopted in 1971 based on data from the 1960s, and we've come a long way since then. And so, you know, those standards are evolving, but it's going to be slow. And so we have to rely on things like industry expertise, the latest data in science, and as you and I have said before, common sense. And, you know, now I'm starting to say it's up to us to address this challenge proactively. We shouldn't be waiting for regulations to change because that takes many, many years.
That OSHA comment is interesting and is big. I didn't realize that. And yeah, it sounds like it's saying the same thing that we've been talking about all series long. Is that, you know, waiting on regulation to shift to do the right thing is pretty wild, and we should be willing at least to look at the studies that are out there today and make a wise and safe and educated decision based on that, rather than wait for the government agencies to make it a requirement. I also want to call back to that conversation that we had with Dr. Salgo and what ChemDAQ and ASP have been doing together. That's new in the industry, at least, you know, to the degree that I have my ear to the ground, where you have sterilizer manufacturers really stepping forward in good faith, trying to make chemical safety and chemical monitoring a priority. Do you think that type of thing is going to continue to grow ahead of the pace of regulatory requirements? Like, you know, if at some point OSHA says that this is required in a similar way they did to ETO, then almost overnight that's going to become a standard in the department. But Yeah. What do you think about the evolution of those kinds of partnerships?
Yeah, I do, Bobby. I think that's my first trend for the future I'm identifying. That's that manufacturers, like ASP and others that are working on the latest and greatest low temp sterilizers and the latest and greatest automated endoscope reprocessors are placing staff safety, user safety at the forefront of those designs and that technology. Of course, patient safety and sterility assurance are paramount and always will be, but staff safety is being baked into those conversations at the requirements generation level, which is a wonderful thing as we evolve that culture of safety in the department. And sort of on the other side of that coin, the second trend that we're identifying, and I have a front row seat to this, of course, at ChemDAQ, is evolving gas monitoring technology. Adopting the technological increases that are commonplace in our society, like data analysis, like predictive analytics, like AI, to lead to lower detection levels, faster response times, and smarter electronics for accessibility, usability, and productivity in the department. And I think that all of that data and information is going to be integrated together more formally to help inform those workflows and increase that efficiency in sterile processing departments.
Yeah. So if the manufacturers are getting more serious about it, and if the detection technology is getting better, both in terms of, what it can detect and how it, reports out that information to the users, what's that going to change about how departments run? Like on the, boots on the ground, what's that look like in the future, fast forward 5 years or so?
Yeah, I think it goes back to we're seeing this trend, this evolution away from spot checking, badge monitoring, routine IH testing, all valid, all good things like we've discussed, but more in favor of that continuous monitoring simply because of the information that it provides to the technicians and the leaders in the department. People are recognizing, of course, that it's not just about the 8-hour time weighted average, it's about the acute exposure as well. And only continuous monitoring can give you both of those simultaneously and continuously throughout the course of your day. And so, when I explain it to people, I say, think about this. Imagine you didn't have to wait for your sterilizer to vent because you had a continuous monitor that was validating low levels of hydrogen peroxide when you're interacting with that machine. Imagine if you didn't have a sterilizer malfunction because your continuous monitoring data informed a preventive maintenance cycle to make sure that machine was continuing to run optimally. Imagine that you didn't have staff members that were overexposed because there was an emissions event and your monitor automatically turned on a ventilation system above the sterilizer to evacuate the air in that particular area. All of this is made possible by smart, intelligent, continuous monitoring technology. And Bobby, I think the best thing about that, the best news about that is most of these capabilities already exist. So, really the future is now for what we're doing in staff safety through continuous monitoring in SPDs.
Yeah. So it has more to do with the adoption and departments seeing the value in those things and regulatory agencies kind of catching up to the research and the technology is what the future is, not necessarily that we need some massive innovation in order to enable us to keep people safe.
Completely agree. I think it's already here. It's going to continue to evolve. We see how fast technology is evolving even in the last couple of years. It's no different in the sterilization space. And I think that we ignore that at our peril. We want to embrace that as an opportunity, not a threat or challenge to the status quo.
Yeah. Well, there's your new catchphrase, Alex. If it's not, we don't talk about this enough. It's the future's here now. We have the technology. I don't know. All right. Well, that's going to do it for today's episode. Thanks for giving us a glimpse into what the future of chemical monitoring might look like. If you have some further questions around chemical monitoring, I would encourage you to reach directly out to Alex. We can find his contact information in the video description. And until we talk to you again next month, on behalf of Alex, myself, and the whole team over at Beyond Clean, keep fighting dirty.